The Day They Lost the President. From the Roswell Incident, the classic study of UFO contact by Charles Berlitz and William L. Moore. According to a series of reports, including one rather detailed account, President Eisenhower had a chance to examine flying saucer wreckage at Muroc Air Force Base on February 20th, 1954. President Dwight D. Eisenhower had gone to California in the middle of February for a golfing vacation during which he was staying at the ranch of a friend, Paul Roy Helms. For theorists who postulate that Ike's vacation in California was a cover for a secret visit to Muroc, it is interesting to observe that the president had just come back from a quail shooting vacation in Georgia less than a week before. It can also be noted that Muroc is not very far from Palm Springs, where the president was staying, and a visit to Muroc would have been possible if he could have disappeared from the press corps' constant scrutiny for even one day. On February 20th, 1954, Eisenhower apparently went somewhere on his own, without his entourage, and, for the press corps at least, he had disappeared. Late in the evening of the 20th, wild rumors began to circulate among the press corps to the effect that the president was not where he was supposed to be, that he had either disappeared from the ranch, Smoke Tree, or something very serious had happened to him. With repeated phone calls to official sources at the ranch bringing only repeated assurances that all was well, the reporters were left free to speculate. The tension of an already shaky situation was heightened when several reporters succeeded in wringing from confidential sources that the president really was missing. But when word arrived that Press Secretary James Haggerty had been hastily summoned to Smoke Tree from the midst of a state cookout to make a statement, the pent-up speculation of the press corps ran amok. Where, in fact, was the president? Nobody seemed to know for sure. Merriman Smith of the United Press jumped to a hasty conclusion that Eisenhower had suffered a medical emergency of some sort. He hit the press wire with a report that the president had been taken from the ranch for medical treatment. The Associated Press did him one better by flashing on its New York wire the news that Ike was dead, only to be forced to retract it moments later when Press Secretary Haggerty appeared, definitely not in a good mood. In the press room of the Mirador Hotel, amid a scene described by Time magazine as a demonstration of journalistic mob hysteria, Haggerty solemnly announced that the uproar had in fact been caused by nothing more than the president having knocked a cap off a tooth while chewing on a chicken leg, and that he had been taken by his host Paul Helms to the local dentist to have it repaired. The press corps accepted the story, but the rumors persisted. Had Ike really gone to a local dentist, or was the story a cleverly concocted cover for what had really happened? At least one persistent, although generally discredited rumor, had it that there were other reasons for Ike's disappearance that evening, and the reason was somewhat out of this world. According to this new rumor, the president's tooth was all a cover story, and that in fact he had been taken in strictest secrecy to nearby Edwards Air Force Base to view the remains of the crashed discs and the preserved bodies of the little men that had piloted them. Meade Lane, then director of Borderland Sciences Research Associates, now Borderland Sciences Research Foundation, had heard these rumors too, but had paid little attention to them until about 3 months later, when on April 16, 1954, he received a startling letter from one of his associates, Gerald Light of Los Angeles. In this letter, Light stated that he had spent some 48 hours at Edwards Air Force Base in the company of 3 other men, journalist Franklin Allen of the Hearst newspapers, financier Edward Norse of the Brookings Institute, and Bishop, later Cardinal, James F. A. McIntyre of Los Angeles, and had seen no fewer than 5 separate and distinct types of aircraft being studied by military scientists and officials. Light said he was so shaken by what he had seen that he qualified his reactions as giving him the distinct feeling that the world had come to an end with fantastic realism. No wonder this letter followed. Gerald Light, 10545 Scenario Lane, Los Angeles, California. Letter received April 16, 1964. Mr. Meade Lane, San Diego, California. My dear friend, I have just returned from Muroc. The report is true, devastatingly true. I made the journey in company with Franklin Allen of the Hearst papers and Edwin Norse of Brookings Institute, Truman's erstwhile financial advisor, and Bishop McIntyre of Los Angeles. Confidential names for the present, please. When we were allowed to enter the restricted section, after about 6 hours in which we were checked on every possible item, event, incident, and aspect of our personal and public lives, I had the distinct feeling that the world had come to an end with fantastic realism. For I have never seen so many human beings in a state of complete collapse and confusion as they realized that their own world had indeed ended with such finality as to beggar description. The reality of other plane aeroforms is now and forever removed from the realms of speculation and made a rather painful part of the consciousness of every responsible scientific and political group. During my 2-day visit, I saw 5 separate and distinct types of aircraft being studied and handled by our Air Force officials with the assistance and permission of the Etherians. I have no words to express my reactions. It has finally happened. It is now a matter of history. President Eisenhower, as you may already know, was spirited over to Muroc one night during his visit to Palm Springs recently, and it is my conviction that he will ignore the terrific conflict between the various authorities and go directly to the people via radio and television if the impasse continues much longer. From what I could gather, an official statement to the country is being prepared for delivery about the middle of May. I will leave it to your own excellent powers of deduction to construct a fitting picture of the mental and emotional pandemonium that is now shattering the consciousness of hundreds of our scientific authorities and all the pundits of the various specialized knowledges that make up our current physics. In some instances, I could not stifle a wave of pity that arose in my own being as I watched the pathetic bewilderment of rather brilliant brains struggling to make some sort of rational explanation which would enable them to retain their familiar theories and concepts. And I thank my own destiny for having long ago pushed me into the metaphysical woods and compelled me to find my way out. To watch strong minds cringe before totally irreconcilable aspects of science is not a pleasant thing. I have forgotten how commonplace such things as the dematerialization of solid objects had become to my own mind. The coming and going of an etheric or spirit body has been so familiar to me these many years, I had just forgotten that such a manifestation could snap the mental balance of a man not so conditioned. I shall never forget those 48 hours at Muroc. G.L. Assuming that this letter is not a hoax, there are several key points which seem to emerge as one examines it, not the least of which is the question of who this Gerald Light might be and what he was doing at Edwards with the 3 reasonably well-known figures he names. Unfortunately, almost nothing is known about Light himself aside from the fact that Meade Lane, recipient of the letter, described him once in an early BSRF publication as a gifted and highly educated writer and lecturer who liked to dabble in clairvoyance and the occult. The most interesting thing about Light's letter, however, is his assertion that President Eisenhower was spirited over to Muroc one night during his visit to Palm Springs recently, an assertion at variance with Press Secretary Haggerty's chicken bone explanation for Ike's disappearance on the night of February 20th, 1954. If indeed Eisenhower had only been taken to the dentist, then why the long official silence on the matter and the repeated statements from Smoke Tree that all was well? If the dentist's story were true, it would certainly have been a case where the truth could have been told and the wild rumors circulating about Ike's disappearance quelled at once, without having done any harm in the process. The attempted all-is-well cover-up at first, and then the calling of Haggerty himself to deal with what must have appeared as a mounting crisis with the press, seems excessive for the simple explanation that followed. Admittedly, the evidence is circumstantial at best, but it is nonetheless interesting. One certain thing about Light's letter is the fact that his conviction about Eisenhower being prepared to go directly to the people about the middle of May definitely never came to pass. If Ike was preparing an official statement on the matter, he must have been persuaded not to deliver it by those same authorities that had been advocates of strict secrecy from the very beginning. Apparently, Ike was let in on the secret as one of the first of a small but carefully selected group of scientific, military, and civilian personnel from all walks of life. Light, Allen, Norse, and McIntyre must also have been selected as part of this group, who were shown the evidence over a period of time, possibly for the purpose of gauging from their observed reactions what the effect on the general public would likely be if such a story were released. If such is the case, the mental confusion and near pandemonium that appear to have resulted and that Light describes in his letter must have provided enough ammunition to result in a total victory for the forces of secrecy. The witnesses who had seen the evidence were silenced on their oath oaths, and the project to release the news to the public was resultantly scrapped. Eisenhower, it is said, ordered silence and further study, though. The fact that Gerald Light apparently broke his oath by writing to Meade Lane probably left them unperturbed once it was discovered that Lane was not important enough to make the story stick, even if he did publish it. According to the late British saucer researcher and writer Desmond Leslie, who reportedly did some investigating in the Muroc vicinity while on visit to Los Angeles in the summer of 1954, President Eisenhower had a look-see into Hangar 27 at the craft during his Palm Springs vacation. He would identify his source of information only as an Air Force man. Two other bits of research, however, have since come to light, which seem to indicate that there may be some truth here after all. The first details with the dentist who was supposed to have treated Ike for his broken tooth. Although the dentist is now dead, Moore succeeded in contacting a member of his family in June 1979 and found her strangely reluctant to talk about the incident. While she said she did recall the dentist's being called upon to treat the president, she was curiously unable to remember what the time of day it was, what the circumstances were surrounding the event, what the president's problem was, or even how many times he saw the dentist. I can't recall how many times, maybe twice, maybe more, she said. I don't remember. She did recall, however, attending a presidential steak fry the next evening where he was loudly introduced to reporters as the dentist who had treated the president. It would seem that a family member of anyone, doctor or dentist, calling out in mid-evening to treat the President of the United States for an emergency would more vividly recall the details of the incident even after 25 years. In summary, the very fact that she cannot recall details which most people under similar circumstances would easily remember seems strongly to suggest that the extent of the dentist's involvement was only to act as a convenient, howbeit willing, accessory to the cover story worked up by Press Secretary Haggerty to placate the press corps. While the family may have viewed the entire matter as part of their patriotic duty at the time, it seems natural that now, 25 years after the fact, a family member is unable to recall the details of what she was told to tell reporters at that time. Her embarrassment at this could easily explain her reluctance to have her name connected with it. Another relevant bit comes from Mrs. Frank Scully, widow of the author of Behind the Flying Saucer, who recalled that in 1954 she and her husband had bought a cabin in the desert mountains above Edwards Air Force Base. According to Mrs. Scully, one of the carpenters who came to work for them in about June of that year had previously worked as a civilian employee at Edwards. This man, whose name she was unable to recall, had told them that that President Eisenhower had indeed visited the base in secrecy some months before, and that it was strange the press never learned about it.
The Crescent Moon Club, in association with ABT, presents Omnibus Unlimited, a roundtable discussion of provocative subjects which must be addressed today. A new philosophy for the third millennium. Hello again, everyone. I'm Lawrence Nobile, independent researcher and host of Omnibus Unlimited. Tonight, from our ABT studios in Dedham, our topic for discussion is the day they lost the president. Joining us to address this subject is seeker and reader John Horrigan. John, thanks for being on the show tonight and for a terrific story there.
Thanks, Larry. Good to be here.
John, the day they lost the president, what that reading that you've just given us, where did that come from and so forth?
Comes from Charles Berlitz, who handles a lot of the strange phenomena stories. He's very commercial. I call it a padded Ripley's, believe it or not. And William L. Moore, who is devoted most of his life to saucer crash stories. So it's called The Roswell Incident, came out in 1980. And it's the most important UFO encounter of our century, the Roswell crash, which apparently alien bodies were recovered.
Now, the day they lost the president, it's naturally this would be significant insofar as the president is a very public person. Is actually a president, of course, is just a presider over many committees and so forth. And the president is expected to be at a certain place at a certain time every day for at least 4 years. So, but I suppose that being the president, you could sneak out every now and then and do whatever it is you want to do. But in this case, with President Eisenhower, a apparently no one in his entourage knows that he's gone. Oh, well, I mean, that's all they know is that he's gone, and they don't know where he is. That's the case. Is that not right?
Yeah, and at least with JFK, they knew he was with Marilyn, you know what I'm saying? Or Judith Exner or whatever. They used to spirit JFK out, but his staff would know. But in this case, the staff didn't know. The press secretary, Haggerty, is at a steak fry and has to be called in because the president was missing. Ike probably said, you can have the night off tonight, you know? And then somebody checked on him, and word got back, the president is missing. And we have 3 different accounts here where they place him at Muroc, which later became Edwards Air Force Base, and he viewed the remains of a crashed disc or discs, and that he either viewed one or several alien bodies. That, of course, is what I'm reciting to you, is according to Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz, from this book. And I found it astounding, that information, and I thought that maybe we could comment about how vulnerable is the president of the free world, the president of the United States? Could Secret Service, obviously they couldn't save Ronald Reagan from taking a bullet, every 20-year curse, JFK, McKinley died, who was it, Harding, that didn't stay long in 1920s, Garfield took a bullet, FDR died in office, but how vulnerable is the president? We've seen attacks on the president, President Ford. There was an attack on President Nixon. The President can he slip out? And he, as you said, he's under a fine spotlight all day and all night. That's not necessarily so. Once those doors close, and I'm sure there are secret passages in the White House, the JFK tunnel, where to get the president out in case of a terrorist attack, or to dodge the press and whatnot. But when the president disappears on February 20th, 1954, and what's interesting to me, okay, he had just come off a golfing vacation, and then a week later he goes to Smoke Tree Ranch to see his buddy. I mean, that doesn't sound like the president. He comes off a vacation and goes back to work. He doesn't go on another vacation. And that's conveniently, that's near Edwards Air Force Base. It's the closest place that he can get, and he's at Smoke Tree, then he's at the facility, then they don't know where he is. And first the story's put out that there's some sort of medical problem. The Associated Press prints that the president is dead. A variety of things. We've seen accounts where people have been, they've said that people are dead when in fact they were not.
Very interesting. And actually, how long was the president missing for? Approximately
12 hours. Actually, I'm sorry. Close to 24.
Close to 24 hours. The president is out of contact, thus leaving a potentially more dangerous person in Richard Nixon in charge, but only for 24 hours. Of course, I've seen things happen in a much shorter time span. But you're right, John. The president, being like any other human being, is vulnerable. The fact that he has a large entourage would mean that it would be harder to get to the president, but not necessarily impossible. But when we get back to your account that you read about, and the letter from, it was Gary Light, is that right?
Gerald Light.
Gerald Light. What I found interesting in his letter was the depth of analysis in which he wrote about the reactions of the scientists. Not the fact that they had the alien ships and so forth, or the bodies, and the wonderment of that. Naturally, it's wonderment, but he described it as confused and pathetic, and perhaps the right decision was made after all. In which the announcement of beings from another planet was forestalled, simply because if our finest minds, our finest scientists and mathematicians can't handle it, or can at least handle it to a degree, then what is the general public going to do? Your thoughts about that, John? If it were in 1954. It is announced that we are not alone in the universe. What do you think would be the general populace reaction?
In 19, that's, I think that I'd say you're crazy. I like what Light says. Like you said, though, and you can tell that he's a very intelligent man by the crux of that letter, and that he was there for a reason. And that perhaps they had a clergyman there, a bishop, they had scientists, engineers, and they were segmenting the population, testing them through these foremost authorities or pinnacles in their respective fields. And they didn't react too well and judged on that. Hey, we ain't going nowhere. And Ike was probably wholeheartedly, just as Jimmy Carter was, going to come forward, and Reagan saw one. And then they were told, no, there's no, because this is the highest classified secret. Because if you have a downed disc, Larry, I'm an American, okay, and you're in the Soviet Union, and you get a downed disc, and as an American, am I scared? Why am I scared? Tell me, if you get a downed disc, militarily.
Well, because you can learn so much from it.
Imagine if you learn to become some sort of transparent aeroform in your Air Force, if you get this technology. So that's why it's so classified. You know, if you can travel without fuel, and travel with electromagnetism and working anti-gravity and whatnot. So that's why, of course. So did they recover extra biological entities? Yes. I'm sure that there were some sort of figures that were recovered. Whether one was, I've heard rumors that 3 lived, and that one lived up until 1957 and wrote what was called the Yellow Book, all about the culture, and another one that they called him EBA, EBE, short for extraterrestrial biological entity, and he supposedly died, and then there was a female entity that that could read their mind. But I think what happened with the president is he should be apprised of these. If he's the President of the United States, he should be compartmented and have the highest clearance possible. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, there are things that the president should not be accessed to. I mean, he's best to see no evil, hear no evil, as when we saw the Oliver North scandal that tried to pull Reagan down, the Contra scandal. But something like this, the president should know. He is a figurehead, but it's not so, because the president is only in there for, if he's lucky, 8 years. And these secrets that have been nested on by the particular agencies, whether it's the Central Intelligence or the NSA, the National Security Agency, or whomever, or the Air Force. I know the FBI and Hoover had a great interest in it. So a lot of the times, the government really doesn't know what the government knows. It's so compartmented. And, for instance, the FBI will have certain information that it wouldn't give to the NSD, or the NSA, rather, or the CIA.
Well, I mean, and the NSA itself was pretty secret until not too long ago. And if you've just joined us, the name of this program is Omnibus Unlimited, Radiovision for the 21st Century. Tonight, our roundtable is discussing the day they lost the president. I'm joined by seeker and reader John Horrigan. And John, what about getting back to Mr. Light's letter? It does go into great detail, and as you point out, he's a very articulate person, obviously intelligent. Do you see a day when we will, and in light of that, since 1954, our culture has been exposed to various stimuli such as Star Wars, Star Trek, Space 1999, a lot of other programs. In fact, there was one program called V, where aliens from another regular TV series, aliens from another planet come here and try to take us over, and our struggle to stop them. Do you think we're conditioned enough to be told that, hey, here we go, we're part of a community?
Absolutely. I think we were subliminally conditioned. And E.T., Stephen, and these are waves. Maybe we're being conditioned. We're doing this show. We're getting some sort of outside force that's nudging us along. Say, do this show on this particular item. But absolutely, it looks that way. I know that it seems kind of primitive, doesn't it? The way we get into orbit by those huge boosters. Doesn't it seem compared to these other plane aeroforms that Mr. Light speaks of? We've got to transcend and use what's made in the universe. And I'm convinced of that other plane, of that fourth dimension. If I were to mention that you had a soul 20 years ago, or that there are ghosts, people say you're crazy. Now we've seen photographs of ghosts or spiritual entities. We've actually photographed an electromagnetic aura around the body, which we could deem the soul. So I like what it said about physics in here. I think physics is funny, and I know that you take pokes at it.
Read that part again, if you would.
Let me just find it here regarding physics. He's talking about the painful part of the consciousness of every responsible scientific and political group. Now, what is that, an oxymoron? A responsible scientific and political group? There aren't any. Going back, I don't have it here. Let me see.
Well, it's true. I have been known to poke fun at physics and a lot of other things. And of course, as you mentioned when we're talking about conditioning, certainly this type of show, Omnibus Unlimited, in which we talk about the bizarre and the unusual and the supernatural, this show would not have been possible 20 years ago, 30 years ago in the 60s, perhaps the 70s, but certainly would not have been given the type of respect that it is being given today. People do understand that there are such things as ghosts. We just don't understand exactly what ghosts are. We understand that they manifest themselves and so forth, and so that since that is the case, certainly it must be the case also with aliens. It's hard to imagine that we're all alone. John, did you find that part there? Or what do you got?
Yeah, I found it here. He says, I will leave it to your own excellent powers of deduction to construct a fitting picture of the mental and emotional pandemonium that is now shattering the consciousness of hundreds of our scientific authorities and all the pundits of the various specialized knowledges that make up our current physics. See, so in some instances, I could not stifle a wave of pity that arose in my own being as I watched the pathetic bewilderment of rather brilliant brains struggling to make some sort of rational explanation which would enable them to retain their familiar theories and concepts. So.
And I think it's interesting that instead of simply accepting it, and which should be the natural thing to do, that, my goodness, it's understood that we are not alone. But here are our best scientists, our best minds, saying that, my goodness, they think that they're alone. They think that there's an edge to the world, an edge to the universe. I think that that's fascinating. Any final words, John? We only got a couple minutes left.
Yeah, I think that this stuff should remain top secret. I found out on my own. Everybody else can. We're not alone, but I think that still God is the pinnacle. See, these beings are God's creatures too. That's how I can reconcile my religion. And I need Jesus to get to God through my religion, just as though somebody would need Buddha or Elijah to get to God, or Muhammad. You know, I think that as long as you keep your spiritual awareness up, and that your heart in the right place, your mind and heart in the right place, you be good and want to be good, then it doesn't matter if we're being invaded by these dinosaur-roids.
Very interesting, and it may be that the biggest military secret is that there is, after all, a God. That will have to do it for our show tonight on the day they lost the president. I'd like to thank my guest for being here tonight, John Horrigan, seeker and reader. Thank you very much for reading and being here tonight.
Thank you, Larry. Good job.
I'd also like to thank ABT for our visual backdrop tonight. Another outstanding job once again. I'd also like to mention that for our audience out there, our audience that is listening and or watching tonight's show, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on Omnibus Unlimited, the address to write to is Omnibus Unlimited, Box 577, Dover, Massachusetts, 02030-0577, and all letters will be answered on upcoming episodes of Omnibus Unlimited. I'm Lawrence Nobile, independent researcher and host of Omnibus Unlimited. For all of us here at Omnibus Unlimited, Thank you for your attention. Good night and good luck. Omnibus Unlimited is a presentation of ABT and the Crescent Moon Club.